from Abuja.
Hello, I'm glad you're a part of our show. We appreciate you. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and this is Magnus Kpakol GVA. As always, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, a poverty climate change. Why has poverty persisted in Africa? What happened after a flurry of countries gained independence around 1960? Was there a climate change in attitudes that caused a tectonic preference for government or public sector work over private sector enterprise? We have cuts from a documentary that attempts to see the role of private enterprise in fighting poverty. But before this is only God. The economics of why people should not say it that way. Now up next in our quick view, we rank development aid among givers and takers. That's coming right up. The idea that large donations can remedy poverty has dominated the theory of economic development and the thinking among many international aid agencies and governments. Countries over the decades have been spending billions in development aid in Africa and other developing nations. Although development aid may be efficient in lessening any immediate suffering, it is not a solution in the long run. In this connection, which of the following countries is not among the top 3 world largest development aid donors per capita? The Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. Which of the following African countries is not among the top 3 in development aid received? Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Tanzania. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, are poverty climate change? But up next in our hidden economics is only God. Magnus by the great Nigerian musician, singer, and music producer Duncan Wene Mighty Okechukwu, simply known as Duncan Mighty, or the Port Harcourt person. Magnus in Ikwere, a River State language, generally means God and I going together. Quite often in Nigeria, when people are stumped and don't know what to do, they would just say, "It's well." Or they would say, "It's only God." It turns out that you tend to hear this quite a lot from poor or poorer people. What do they really mean? Let us try to examine what people really do after they are pushed to the end or are thoroughly disappointed. After saying it is only God, what do they really do? Sometimes they may sit and appear to wait for God to literally show up or do something through someone. Or they may be driven to get up and try something themselves. This means they actually are not just saying it's only God frivolously. Almost always, they are wittingly or unwittingly expecting some activity in the God economy. But quite often, it seems that what they expect is actually small. That's why they use the word only. But only is usually applied to something that is limited. Over 100 years ago, J.D. Rockefeller was asked the question, how much is enough? His answer, just a little bit more. On the other hand, the Greek philosopher Epicurus said this, and I quote, "Nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is too little." So as it turns out, poor people tend to often just look for just a little bit and not a little more. So where is the real economics in our story? Well, here it is. Everybody, well, at least everybody who believes there is God, knows that God is big. Indeed, extremely big. In fact, so big you can't go over him, under him, or around him. Therefore, it seems to me that such a God will have to have a limitless economy. So when someone says he's only God, they have actually misspoken. Only cannot go with something that is limitless. This is perhaps the reason that poor people tend to stay poor. They appear to be consumed by a poverty mentality that limits their expectations, even from God. To poor people, very little is enough, instead of enough being very little. Anyone fighting poverty must teach poor people to think big. God is limitlessly big. Only He is enough. Our hidden economics for you. Before we start our discussion, here are our quick view answers. United Kingdom is the donor country not among the top 3 in development aid per capita worldwide. However, what really matters is the amount of aid provided. In 2015, the United States gave $31 billion, followed by the United Kingdom, which gave over $18 billion. Germany, Japan, and France gave $17.78 billion, $10.4 billion, and $9.23 billion respectively. Nigeria is the country not among the top 3 in development aid received in Africa. For comments, adverts, and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. So, what can we do to free Africa from dependence on development assistance? The German organization DW has a presentation called Poverty and Profit: The Business of Development Aid. The presentation suggests how the private sector may actually be more potent than the public sector or foreign governments and their development aid in ending poverty. Let's take a look.
More than 800 million people around the world are affected by extreme poverty and hunger. In sub-Saharan Africa, almost a quarter of the population is undernourished, in spite of government development aid coming from industrialised countries. Private businesses are now getting more and more involved in the fight against poverty.
Responsibility has been shifted from the public sphere into the hands of corporations and the market. The corporations are the new saints, the new paladins of development and food security. You know, we just blow the whistle and they will come in and save us all.
More and more major Western banks and businesses are getting involved in development aid, and they're doing so with government support. In 2015, member states at the UN General Assembly resolved to eliminate extreme poverty and hunger worldwide by 2030 with the help of the private sector. But does this new model of development aid work? Will it really benefit the needy, or does it just serve corporate interests? We take a look at several examples in East Africa, in Kenya, Zambia and Tanzania. We're about to visit a business in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, that receives support from France's state development aid agency, AFD. Its subsidiary, Kpakol, and other European development banks backed a fund worth 45 million euros. It, in turn, invested €2 million in the Nairobi-based business European Foods Africa. Development banks such as Kpakol were originally set up to fight hunger and poverty, but in this case, state development funds mix with private capital and are being invested with a focus on financial returns.
Actually, in relation to what they just said, it is actually difficult for Africa to catch up with much of the rest of the world, because they are so far ahead and we appear to be so far behind. So for us to be competitive, we have to do things that are more imaginative, more aggressive, and more innovative. We have to look for partnerships. We cannot use the same methods that the West used when they were starting off, because they did not have the kind of competition that we now face. So what I believe we have to do is what we're trying to do here at the EBS is to work with our local government authorities, to work with people at the so-called grassroots at the bottom, to have capacity to be able to look for partnerships outside of Nigeria, and especially in the West, in the advanced economies, in the industrialized countries. We have to get our people to know how to engage them. We cannot do it just from the top, where we drill it down from the top. We have to work it from the bottom. I think that that's really essential. If we're going to be competitive, we have to come up with new methods, innovative methods, be more aggressive, as I've said.
European development banks invest in private companies to improve living conditions, especially in remote rural areas. For example, in Zambia, one of the world's poorest countries, people here have an average life expectancy of just 52. In the northeast of the country, a huge oil palm plantation has been set up. It measures 20,000 hectares in total and also features a mill to obtain oil from the fruits. The operation is run by Zambia's biggest agricultural and food processing company, Zambeef. €35 million were loaned to Zambeef by several development banks in Europe, including the German Investment and Development Corporation DEG, a subsidiary of the KfW Development Bank. Zambeef used some of the money to found a subsidiary, Zampalm.
Zampalm is a project which deals in palm trees to produce palm oil as cooking oil at the moment. Zampam started in late 2008. We had our first nursery in December 2008, of which those are some of the plants that we tried to plant in 2009.
The plantation started off with major problems. A consultant had recommended the wrong type of palm tree. Then it became clear that the soil was too moist for oil palms. The company had the water table lowered by 1.2 metres. The high expenditures for all this preparatory work were made possible by the loan from DEG. Why would DEG invest in such a dubious project?
As we watch this information and these documentaries that people are giving to us, we also have to recognize that sometimes these people may have ulterior motives. The real motive may be to provide markets for their own goods or to stimulate employment growth in their own countries. Sometimes they just said, okay, I'm going to give you a loan, and you use this loan to buy stuff, but to buy stuff from themselves. But we want to be able to get these loans to buy stuff from within Africa. This is something that we have to make sure that our leaders understand, even especially, of course, especially at the grassroots, at the community level. We don't always have to have everything reside at the top of the pyramid. We got to make sure that people understand across board, and especially at the bottom, that they can go out there and have their own partnerships, have their own engagements, where it is profitable for their communities.
We, taxpayers, are paying up front so that the corporations can start making a profit right away and don't have to wait. And I find this absolutely unacceptable.
Before the partnership with Rudolf Bühler, the farmers mainly sold their spices to tourists. That's changed because Bühler agrees a guaranteed price with them in advance.
Before I joined this project, my harvest and my earnings were very low. But now I earn twice as much and can lead a much better life.
In the West, they have what I would call overlapping demand, where they sell the same kinds of goods, they buy the same kinds of goods. The Americans will sell their automobiles to Europe, and Europe will sell their automobiles to the United States. And essentially, the Americans may sell Ford automobiles, sell Cadillacs to Europe, and the Europeans will sell Range Rovers, Jaguars, Mercedes-Benz cars. So this is what I mean by overlapping demand. They're selling and buying similar kinds of merchandise. But with Africa, the West has asymmetrical kinds of demand. They are not overlapping. We sell and buy different kinds of goods because Africa has not been industrially sophisticated enough to be able to sell to the Europeans and to the Americans the same kinds of commodities that they sell to us. So this makes it important that we go and develop markets for the kinds of goods that we sell to them. We got to make sure that there is a market to buy the goods that we provide. And in some cases, we'll just have to add value to our natural resources, even though intermediately. But we have to do that to be competitive. It's extremely important. So, why is poverty persistent in Africa? What happened that caused much of the rest of the world to speed away from Africa in economic growth and development? Today, poverty in sub-Saharan Africa is still near 50% after all these years. Consider that in 1960, the population of sub-Saharan Africa was about 222 million people. So if at that time you had a poverty rate of 50%, you will see a population of poor people of only about 111 million people. But in 2018, with a population of about 1 billion people, at 50%, 500 million people are poor. So the world of poor people in Africa is expanding and exacting an optic toll on Africa. People visiting Africa will now see a lot more poor people than 60 years ago. And Africans themselves may feel more overwhelmed by poverty by just seeing so much of it. And this is why practical or substantive significance can be far more compelling than statistical significance. 50% is not really what matters. What really matters is 500 million people. This number must be reduced. But how, when it appears that Africans tend to prefer easy street in making money? People sometimes focus more on making money than on value creation, innovation, and impact for society. I submit that you will get the money if you create solutions, if you are innovative and create value. Money is paid for value. When money comes to your pocket without much value, it is called corruption. Following independence, it appears that across Africa, workers have tended to want to work for the government than in the private sector because they feel the public sector offers better job security and may also more readily allow you to get easy money. This attitude, which has forced people from private industry, may be one of the main reasons for poverty in Africa. Could it represent a climate change that has promoted poverty in Africa? People spend too much energy and resources trying to get or keep a government job. Sometimes people change their ages so much they continue working when they are obviously not as strong and able as a truly younger person. This crowding out effect causes poor productivity, weak competitiveness, and poor incomes compared to the rest of the world where the private sector is king. Poverty is also persistent in Africa because of conflict and population growth. Indeed, conflict may be a more serious source of poverty than many of the other factors. Even so, in the end, education is really the solution for virtually all of the potential causes. Poverty is not just an affliction of the bottom of society. It also causes a deadly malady that I describe as poverty stress for the so-called well-to-do. So let's fight it. Let's fight it, and mostly by promoting education, skills, and private enterprise. It will be a good thing. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.